Today we're going to review the 8 art elements. The art elements are different parts of art that we can discuss, analyze, and describe. The first art element is line. Line is the simplest art element, and it starts with a point, and that point moves through space and creates a line. We can measure the length of a line and nothing else. Therefore, it is 1D or one-dimensional. That line, however, can continue and end up creating another thing. So if this line continues around and around, but then once crosses over itself, it becomes a new thing. We call that a shape. With a shape, you can measure how long it is, and you can measure how wide it is. So it has 2 measurable dimensions. This shape doesn't have a name. Actually, most shapes in the universe don't have a name. But there are some shapes that do, and there are 3 basic shapes: the triangle, the circle, and the square. These are our basic shapes, and we can combine these in different ways to create new shapes. If we put the square and the triangle together, we can get a house shape, or we could put the triangle together with the circle and make an ice cream cone kind of shape. You could double up a square and create a rectangle. The one with the fewest amount of sides is the circle. It just has 1 side. The one with the most amount of sides is the square with 4 sides, with the triangle kind of in between. Now, shapes can do something as well and create a new art element. Let's take the square. If we take the square and rotate it in space, it can take up the space of a thing we call a form. And the form that it is making is a cylinder, because it has round sides and a circular top. If I take the square and move it up and down instead, now it's taking up the space of a form that we call a cube. If I take another shape, like the circle, and I spin it, it takes up the space of a form we call a sphere. I could also move the circle in one direction, and then it takes up the space of the cylinder again. So the square and the circle can be related in this way. Our last shape can spin and take up the space of a form we call a cone. A cone is a 3-dimensional shape, so we call it a form. A shape that moves in space can create a form. There are 4 basic forms. The one with the fewest amount of sides, the sphere, just an outside. The one with the most amount of sides is the cube, so it has 6. These are white forms, but we could add the next art element to them if we wanted to, and that is color. Everything we see around us has a color. The light comes in, hits the object, and then bounces back to our eye. And then we see colors. There are different kinds of color wheels. In art, we use this one traditionally. Here we have red, blue, and yellow. Those are our primary colors. So we have 3 primary colors. Where they overlap, we create our secondary colors, which are purple, green, and orange. Where all 3 overlap, we get chromatic gray in the middle. Sometimes it kind of looks like brown, but we like to call that chromatic gray. The 3 colors on this side are the warm colors because they might remind us of fire. Red, orange, and yellow are our warm colors. Blue, green, and purple might remind us of water, so we call those our cool colors. There are different ways to get these kinds of overlapping effects. Let's pretend you had a flashlight. If you had a blue flashlight, a red flashlight, and a green flashlight, if you shine them and overlap their colors, you would end up getting cyan, magenta, and yellow. And where all three overlap, you would end up with white. Today, in the printing business, they use CMYK colors. That's cyan, magenta, yellow, and K stands for black. Where they overlap, we get blue, red, and green. So it depends on how you're using your colors that will create the color wheel that you need. Remember that there are three basic colors. The basic colors are also called primary colors. When they mix, they create secondary colors. Color is reflected light. Orange, red, and yellow are considered our warm colors, while blue, green, and purple are considered our cool colors. Our next art element is mass. Mass refers to the weight of something. Sometimes it's real, and sometimes it's the way it looks. A dark-colored box will look heavier than a light-colored box. Even if they're not black and white, the color difference will make things look heavier or lighter. Some art teachers focus on two-dimensional art of painting and drawing, so they don't really refer to mass. They refer to something else we'll talk about later. But mass becomes very helpful when we do sculpture or ceramics. In ceramics, we have this saying that there should be a surprise on the outside and a surprise on the inside. The idea of the surprise on the outside is the decoration. The surprise on the inside is when you pick it up and you find out how light it is. You should be surprised by how the ceramic piece is lighter than it looks. There are artists who like to play around with the art element of mass. Judd Nelson is one. You would think that this is just a regular old trash bag, but it's actually carved out of marble. It weighs probably a ton. So he's playing with this idea of what is normally light and making it super duper heavy. Our next art element is texture. The roughness or smoothness of a surface refers to its texture. It can sometimes be made by repeating an art element over and over again. Let's say I have a line, our simplest art element. If I have one line, that's not really a texture. Even if I add a couple more, that's still not a texture. But if I take a whole bunch of them and put them next to each other, it starts to look like grass. Well, grass is a texture. I can't tell you when it happens, it just sort of happens. So any art element, when it's repeated, it can become a texture. How about light? Well, light and shadow repeated creates a texture, but this is a visual texture. If you reach out and touch a shadow, you wouldn't feel the shadow, but it looks like a visual texture. It even looks like repeated lines, and that can be a texture. How about a form repeated? Absolutely. That can create a texture too. Here's a bunch of little pyramids next to each other. It looks like it could be maybe a bed of nails, a very uncomfortable surface to rest on. But these repeated forms create texture. So that helps us understand that the roughness or smoothness of a surface refers to its texture, and it can sometimes be made by repeating an art element. All objects, art and non-art, take up space. There are many different kinds of space, but we're going to discuss positive and negative space. So here's the container I use to wash my brushes. The container itself is the positive space. The area inside where I put the water is the negative space. The positive space is where the object is, and the negative space is where the object is not. Even over here is the negative space of this container. It sounds a little bit unusual, but when you think about it, you mostly exist in the negative spaces of objects. If you go for a ride in a car, you're in the negative space of the car. If you go to school, you are in the negative space of the building. The rocks and bricks that make up the building, that's the positive space. Our next art element is light. The art element of light helps us see all other art elements. We see everything because the light is reflected off of the object and back to our eye. The light that we see is white light, but white light contains all the colors of the rainbow. When it hits an object like a leaf, the leaf absorbs all the colors of the rainbow except for that shade of green, which is reflected off and back to our eye, so we see green. When it is not bounced back, we see shadow. Shadow is the absence of light. We can see this white light being broken up into its different colors. Here's some sunlight coming into a prism. It goes through the prism and then it's broken up into its components. We use this acronym to remember Roy G. Biv. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. That's an easy way to remember your spectrum. Some art teachers like to use a different art element called value. Value is a combination of mass and light. It's very helpful when you're doing drawings or paintings. Value is the lightness or darkness of a color, black and white, or even a regular color like red, going from light to dark. It gives the sense of weight, to make something look 3D. This is actually flat. It's not round like an actual ball. It's an illusion. But because the artist has used shading and shines and shadows, we get this idea of value creating mass and showing off the light. So value is a combination of mass and light. Let's look at an object. This is a ring. It was made by a Native American artist, and we can see all the art elements in this ring. We have lines separating the different shapes. Shapes are definitely there. It kind of takes up the form of a cylinder. We can identify the colors, blue and turquoise, black and salmon. It has a smooth texture with sharp edges. It has a mass that we can feel a certain weight with. And because light is reflecting off of it in different ways, we're able to see it. So all the art elements are present in this very simple ring, but also in every object you can see around you. Can you identify the art elements you see around you today?